When the CCP comes to invade Taiwan, will America come to its aid? I think the answer to that question is already very crystal clear. Because when the CCP comes a knocking, it may be Taiwan who answers that door, but it'll be America fighting the war.
Assemble.
Out here in Taiwan, we just wrapped up the largest military exercise in our country's entire history, while a 4-star military general led a delegation to, Kankan. And after doing a little bit of research, I found some very interesting connections between the events and the US military wartime command system, discovering a very shocking possibility that the US and Taiwan might have reached some kind of, unspoken agreement. And that is, from the very moment that the CCP tries to invade Taiwan, the US could step up and take complete command of Taiwan's military forces.
Are you like a crazy person?
Now, I reached this conclusion based entirely on my observations, calculations, and the result of eating entirely way too much popcorn. And I'm gonna say off rip, this episode is entirely purely conspiracy theory, yo. But it seems I've been lucky enough to be on point quite a few times before, so who knows, maybe I'll get lucky again. And if so, that'll mean the CCP is very unlucky. Because for them, 真的是代志大条。So, by the time you're watching this video, Taiwan has just wrapped up its largest, longest, most unprecedented military exercise in its entire history. Shit, I saw some of it taking place right on the street.
Well, as Taiwan carries out these drills, their largest ever by length and scale, to simulate what would happen if China takes over this self-governed island, it's also very keen to showcase its new American weapons. Today, we saw more of that firsthand. The military here showing us their HIMARS rocket launchers. Now, these would be very important to helping Taiwan's first line of defense. They're capable of launching short-range GPS-guided rockets, but also firing long-range up to 200 miles, which means that in the event of an attack, they could technically fire at positions along the Chinese coast to slow down Beijing's offense. Now, this week, we were there as they test-fired US-supplied M1 Abrams II towards targets at sea. Now, those are highly mobile, powerful American tanks, with one colonel telling me his crews are now qualified to use these tanks after undergoing training, and they're now ready to use them at any moment.
Meanwhile, the military exercise also utilized many US equipment purchased by Taiwan, all of which have more than proven their worth in actual combat.
On Wednesday, a military truck collided with a scooter at an intersection in central Taiwan. The scooter's driver suffered minor injuries. That same day, an artillery vehicle crashed into 4 parked cars on a residential street in Taoyuan. No one was hurt.
The content of this exercise was very realistic, with even several vehicle accidents occurring. There was no scripting at all. It was actually pretty practical and pretty badass.
Yeah, Nicole, there were just 30 American troops in Taiwan this time last year. Now there will be up to 200 more troops on the island. This as the threat of an invasion from China grows. And while an invasion may not be imminent, U.S. defense officials are urging to increase troop presence. One U.S. commander in the region warning, quote, "Everything needs to go faster."
Now, there's another interesting aspect of this exercise, and that is that there were quite a few English teachers wearing sunglasses observing by the sidelines. The US military claims that they are helping train Taiwan's military and providing advice, and the number of these English teachers has increased from 250 last year to 500 this year.
As Chinese military aircraft frequently harass Taiwan, General Charles Flynn, commander of the US Pacific Army, has announced plans to deploy a new intermediate-range missile system in the Indian Ocean Pacific region by the end of this year to deter the Chinese Communist Party, or CCP.
General Flynn has seen some real combat in several wars, from Desert Storm to Haiti to Iraq to Afghanistan. And he is also the architect of distributed logistics stockpiles across Australia to sustain a future Taiwan. Simply put, General Flynn has seen more than his fair share of real battlefield scenarios, and also has a history of designing strategies for Taiwan's defense.
After serving more than 3 years as the commander of U.S. Army Pacific, General Charles Flynn will be stepping down tomorrow. Our Jonathan Masaki sat down with him for this exclusive interview.
The Army is charged to change once more.
General Charles Flynn took command of the U.S. Army's largest service component command, also known as USARPAC, in June 2021. As we discuss what he does and what his command is all about, you sometimes forget you're talking to a 4-star general and instead are drawn into a discussion you would likely have with a professor on what's going on in the Pacific and the Asian continent.
General Charles A. Flynn retired from the U.S. military just 8 months ago, and he has now appeared in Taiwan's military exercises as an English language instructor, teaching English to Taiwanese military personnel while also observing Taiwan's military exercises.
A delegation of retired, high-ranking U.S. military officers recently arrived in Taiwan to observe the live-fire phase of the annual Hanquang drills, which began on Wednesday and will run for 10 days, the report said, citing a source familiar with the matter.
And it turns out my man did not come alone. A group of retired, high-ranking U.S. military officers decided to join in on the party, and they all visited one of northern Taiwan's most critical points, the Damsui River, all to provide advice to Taiwan's military.
Right.
So let's summarize. In this Taiwanese military exercise, they used newly purchased weapons from my old home, invited 500 Bushibatingwan Laosi to participate, along with a retired 4-star military general and a couple of other high-ranking U.S. military officers, just to看看. When you put all these pieces of information together, you will discover something very interesting, that I am almost out of popcorn, and the fact that I'm gonna need a lot more. Because when it comes to the CCP, 真的是代志大条咯。
中国日前举办孙中山先生150年诞辰纪念大会，热热闹闹，好多人参加。不过，咦，这不是我们国军退役的将领那一笔接啊？听中国领导人习近平演讲，甚至现场奏起中国国歌时，也随全场起立，安内干炮。
So when it comes to the Taiwanese military, most of the personnel are very opposed to the CCP, but there's a small minority of generals who, after retirement, they decide they want to place their lips firmly on the opening of the sphincter of the CCP. But they don't stop there. They even go so far as to making public statements about surrendering to China, or even worse.
国军再报共谍案，而主嫌还是一对军官夫妻档。空军中校孙伟因为沉迷职棒签赌积欠赌债，遭到已经效忠对岸的退役空军上校刘胜树吸收，泄露了汉光演习的情资。而孙伟的太太刘云雅，她是少校军官，在知情之后，竟然跟丈夫一同背叛国家，还牵连到了其他的军官。整起案件一共有8名军方人员涉案，校级军官更是高达6人。
6 months before Taiwan's largest military exercise, Taiwan uncovered its biggest ever active military espionage case. And these spies weren't ordinary people, yo. They were all high-ranking military officers who had access to very important military secrets within the Taiwanese military.
Nearly 80% of Taiwanese people do not agree with Beijing's claim that Taiwan will eventually be part of China. That's according to a poll by the Mainland Affairs Council, which manages relations with China. The survey also found the majority of people disapprove of China demanding that other countries abide by its one China principle.
So as of right now in Taiwan, there's about 13% of the population who are more than willing to unify with the CCP. And if you apply this number to the Taiwanese military, well, Taiwan's military has approximately 40 brigades. It's 150 battalions, 600 companies. Well, this means in a company of about 100 people, there could be about 13 people, about the size of a squadron, or equivalent to the personnel of 9 battalions. So among these people, exactly how many happen to be commanders?
Fuck.
So, if you were a U.S. military commander, while in the process of ensuring Taiwan's security, how exactly would you act to minimize the influence of these 13% traitors and ensure that they cannot be effective within the Taiwanese command structure?
South Korea and the United States are reportedly consulting to delay the transition of wartime operational control from Washington to Seoul until after 2020, currently scheduled for next year.
The U.S. military had an operational control agreement with South Korea, meaning during wartime operational control. South Korea's military belongs to the U.S. military. I believe it is very possible that Taiwan and the United States, through some model, could negotiate a similar agreement that achieves operational control functionality.
That's impossible. That's impossible.
Now, I know this is a bold as fuck speculation, so allow me to make you aware of a very special U.S. law. And then from there, some of this might just make sense.
10 U.S. Code Section 688. Retired members, authority to order to active duty. Duties A under regulations prescribed by the Secretary of Defense. A member described in subsection B may be ordered to active duty by the Secretary of the Military Department concerned at any time. B. The following members of the armed forces may be ordered to active duty pursuant to subsection A. 1. Retired members of the regular Army, regular Navy, regular Air Force, regular Marine Corps, or regular Space Force. 2. members of the retired reserve who retired under Section 1293, 3911, 6323, 8911, or 9311 of this title. 3. Members of the Fleet Reserve and the Fleet Marine Corps Reserve.
In simple terms, any retired member of the U.S. military, regardless of branch and regardless of rank, must return to service if ordered by the U.S. government, as long as they're physically capable, of course. And this also happens to include one 4-star General Charles A. Flynn.
Just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in.
So, if you look back at the first chapter of this exercise, there were about 500 U.S. military personnel observing various units in Taiwan, using newly delivered U.S. weapons, conducting unscripted exercises that Taiwan had never done before. And most importantly, a recently retired 4-star general led a group of retired senior military officers to Taiwan. And I believe this exercise was training for the U.S. military command chain in Taiwan. Now, reminder, Taiwan's military has approximately 40 brigades, 150 battalions, 600 companies, and about 500 to 800 U.S. military personnel. This allows for at least one U.S. military personnel to be stationed at each critical command point, and this also ensures that the command chain won't be compromised by that traitorous 13%. And just by a sheer stroke of coincidence, there are 500 military personnel in Taiwan helping them to train and teaching them English. Do you think this is a coincidence?
No.
Now, in the event of Chinese aggression, America's first response unit would be command systems rather than ground combat troops. Retired U.S. military officers in Taiwan would respond to the U.S. government recruitment to integrate into Taiwan's military command system. This reduces Chinese sensitivity and allows immediate integration with U.S. command systems in Japan and the Philippines. To me, this is a very reasonable and practical strategic ambiguity policy. So you might notice that in a couple of Taiwan's English cram schools, there are increasingly more retired U.S. military personnel teaching ABCs. But remember, 他们只是英文补习班老师哦。
Now I know.
And knowing is half the battle. G.I. Joe!
Now, of course, I could be wrong, although I hope I'm not. But then again, they could just be 英文补习班老师. What do you think? Leave a comment down below. Remember to like, subscribe, and I'll see you on the flip side. Peace!